Since we last spoke, the Big Ten has just up and changed their guidelines. Not rules, but guidelines. Very important distinction between the two. And so essentially, if you've been watching the show for a few weeks, I told you the whole Whitney in fourth grade winning the Geography B metaphor, and yes, it came to fruition. So the Whitney of the Big Ten has been really ushered to the Geography B final. Ohio State is going to the Big Ten championship game, and they just they took the pencil, as I said they would, and they turned it upside down, and they erased the initial guidelines, and they just wrote new ones. Heavy is the hand that holds the pencil. If that's never been said, it's being said now. I did not have a strong visceral reaction to this. Now, part A is, well, because we expected it. Part B is because this is one of those situations where I just think there are good arguments to be made both ways. And in other words, I can empathize with the arguments on both sides of the aisle. But listen, the more I thought about this, I wanted to take a little while. I didn't want to be, first to the microphone on this deal. But the more I thought about it, there is obviously no right fix to what was a terminally flawed design. And Colin right now is showing you B-roll of Kevin Warren, who's kind of been the face of this whole thing when it comes to how bad the Big Ten fumbled this. But, understanding the inner workings of this, Kevin Warren can be the face of it, just like Roger Goodell can be the face of the NFL. I mean, it's a lot of administrative types, a lot of largely nameless, faceless to you and I, administrative types that are really behind the decision-making process here. And so, how in the world could it come to this? How in the world, you may be wondering, if you're just a casual fan, you may look and say, this stuff is a really big deal. How could they back themselves into a corner where they start their season and they don't even have the right protocol in place to where, they can handle it and they can have flexibility? Why are they going to need to, in a front-facing manner, change their own rules? Well, you assume, in thinking that the folks in charge of making the decisions here care as much about this as you do. And that is a very flawed thing to believe. They don't care as much about it as you do. The errors, in other words, let me put it to you like this. The errors that you saw made here, just the glaring oversights that you saw, it's the same kind of thing that happens, like I got a little nephew back home. So if he wants to color with me, I'll take the crayon, I'll color. I'm not really paying attention to staying inside the lines. I'm not looking to hang this in the Louvre. I'm really just trying to entertain him. So I don't care what the picture looks like. Well, I care as much about the quality of my artwork when I'm painting or coloring with my nephew as the Big Ten powers that be did on the integrity of this football season. Most of them didn't want to have it. Okay? You beat at their door long enough to where they acquiesced and they said, okay, give these simpletons their football season. But they didn't take any kind of chunk of time out of their life or their schedule to really think this whole thing through. And so I'll tell you what the football season was. The football season was Big Ten's on the phone, and there's a knock at the door, and it's just someone walks in, you just go, yeah, whatever, just go. That was how they decided on the football season and the parameters under which the football season would be played. So if you want to know, how could it come to this? That's how it could come to this. So now, was it right or wrong? That was the question most recently being asked. The Big Ten has taken their fair share of criticism, and they should take all the criticism. It's their fault. But is it right or wrong? Well, I think it's the correct decision. Right or wrong from a moral or ethical standpoint, man, like I told you the other day, I feel kind of dirty even talking about it. However, I think it was the right decision. Consider the alternative. Here's what I like to do. So if you're arguing that the rules shouldn't have been changed, Ohio State should have been, therefore, mathematically not eligible for the Big Ten championship game, you know what the arguments right now are. The arguments are, Indiana got screwed because of a technicality. Like, that's the argument right now. Consider the alternative, though. Let's just pretend, you and I together, let's pretend that it's not a bunch of administrators. We are the king of the Big Ten. We're the commissioner, and we just rule the whole thing, and it's up to us to make the best decision for the conference. Would you have really made a decision any different? And if you would, remember, it's not just to appease media types or fans. You got to make what the best decision is for the overall greater good of the conference. If you opted not to make this change, it's fair. It's under your purview. Remember, you're the king right now. We're the queen. But I want you to think about what the alternative would mean. Think about this blowback. So You got Ohio State, who's clearly the most quality team up there, and they would have been knocking at your door, pounding on your door, torches and pitchforks in hand, and they would have said, well, number one, we beat that team head to head. So if there's any doubt, we actually played a football game on the field. Hey, here's another really solid piece of ammo that I don't think I've heard enough. If Ohio State would have been able to play this weekend, the outcome wouldn't have mattered. They could have gone and lost to Michigan and still qualified. That's how much of a technicality this was. It wasn't that they needed to win. You see, we can make the argument, well, you need to put yourself out there a minimum number of times. Well, that's assuming that you're risking loss. There was no risk. Like they may have cost themselves a playoff spot if they played and lost to Michigan, who they were a 30-point favorite against. But as it relates to the Big Ten, that's not their jurisdiction. Their jurisdiction is, let's decide who needs to be in our title game. Ohio State could have lost to Michigan, just as long as they played the game. So I don't feel terrible about that. And also, you're going to have Ohio State. Remember, if you don't opt to make this change, you're going to have them telling you, and they'll be right, we fought tooth and nail, even against you, in your better judgment. We fought to make this season happen. And so now, because of your incompetence, when you finally did make the season happen, we're going to be the ones to pay the price? So which side, when we look at the two wheelbarrows, which one has more credibility in the argument? Which one has more ammunition in the wheelbarrow? I think the Ohio State side does. So I think they made the right move here. My next focus is just, how good is Ohio State? I think they're really good. Can I really find out a whole lot about you when you play Nebraska, Rutgers, Michigan State? You beat Penn State by 13, Indiana by 7, and then you're going to play Northwestern in the conference title game, and that's coming up next week. I know what our model says. I know what my eyeballs think they've seen, but I don't know, and they haven't gotten half the work and half the experience under their belt this year that some of the teams they may face in the playoff have. So that's just something to think about down the line.